Can't nobody be free unless we're all free. It's no me and no you, it's just us. Street preacher, what a fan once called me.
Could I ask everyone who's not at these first three tables, so everyone sort of from here back, to stand up? So consider for a moment that the people in the room represent students in Denver schools who enter high school in the 9th grade. The people standing right now represent those who graduate on time, and the people sitting represent those who don't. The on-time graduation rate in Denver right now is 59%. 5 years ago, it was 39%. Shoot a line right about here. If everyone to this side could have a seat. Perfect. This group stay standing. So of the same group, the people standing now represent those who enrolled in college. And the people sitting represent those who did not. Approximately 60% of high school graduates in Denver right now enroll in college the following year. Do one more line right about here. Everyone to this side, have a seat. Perfect. The people standing now represent those who enrolled in college, not into remedial classes, enrolled in college into general classes when they arrived. Approximately 60% of Denver graduates who go to college enter into remedial classes. Y'all can have a seat. I trust and hope that those numbers have a lot to do with why you all are in this room. They certainly represent why I'm in this room. My story is one of coming from a background of a ton of privilege in both race and class and in education, and then having the opportunity to work with the Summer Bridge program, which is now called Breakthrough, which many of you may know. I was the Denver director for 3 years, and we went and recruited students for our program in every one of the 6th grade classrooms in middle schools around the city. And we kicked off every recruiting presentation, a show of hands, who in the room wants to go to college? And in every one of those rooms, all or all but one of those hands were up. And the stats on those kids, that was 2002, 1 in 10 entered a 4-year college, not into a remedial class. And the gap between every hand raised in those rooms and looking around and imagining one out of those 10 kids achieving that goal they named is an unconscionable statistic if we want to build the kind of society that I and we and all of us are committed to. So, a little bit about why we're here. I want to do this pretty quickly so we have some time for Q&A, because I know there's tons of ideas and energy in this group. I want to talk a little bit about what this thing is that we call education reform and what that means from the perspective of somebody who is operating schools. You all are the experts on organizing. I am not an organizer. We work with our families and our communities to do everything we possibly can to create a better environment. And what we know how to do is build schools, and what you know how to do is organize in community. And I want to talk about what this work means from the perspective of an operator, and then we'll try to link that up a little bit into what it means as an organizer, and then would love to make sure we have time for your questions and what you want to talk about as well. So, education reform means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, so I'm going to tackle this from a funny way. I want to talk about 5 risks or big questions I see in this movement of education reform as a means of looking at why organize and what are we fighting for, and work on getting really, really clear about what we're fighting for, because I believe that's incredibly important. So risk number 1, or issue number 1, is are the standards for our kids high enough? Are we shooting at the right bar? Education is dramatically different than it was 10, 15 years ago because of the rigorous assessment and the focus on data and the focus on tracking student progress and evaluation. I am the first person to cheer for that and the biggest fan of that, and we use data-driven measures in our schools all the time. And one of the biggest risks or fears I have about this movement is that we'll look back 10 years from now or 20 years from now and say we were shooting at the wrong targets. The goals that we set out for our kids weren't the right goals or weren't high enough or weren't testing the right things that we seek to know about our students. We can talk all night long about standardized tests and what role they play in education reform, and we can certainly come back to that in the Q&A. My own opinion is the tests we give, being successful on those, being able to read and do math and perform at grade level is critically important, but it's not enough. The data we have now says if students are proficient or students are performing at grade level on those tests, if they're not at that level, it's going to be really hard to be successful in college. But if they are at that level, that is nowhere near a guarantee that they have the preparation to be successful in college and in their future. So where is that bar and how do we know? And so what I would ask of you is when you are talking to people about policy and when you are talking to people about schools, be really rigorous about asking, is this school preparing kids at the level where they are truly going to be successful? You've all seen the news on the Common Core state standards adoption around the country and what that means. Test scores have plummeted in lots of states as they've made that adoption. What that means politically is that issue is going to get hammered from both sides. The folks who are out to take down testing and believe there shouldn't be any accountability systems at all are going to say this is just proof that this system is hurting our schools. And the folks on the other side who are all about it being different in every state and nothing should ever be common around the country are going to hammer on, well, that's proof that this isn't a good system. I personally believe what we're doing around Common Core is critical, and the reason it's so important is it keeps raising that bar. So as you're engaging in your community and as you're talking to people, ask tough questions about what kind of critical thinking exists in a school. Ask tough questions about how schools know that their kids are meeting that bar. So that's risk number one. Are we shooting at the right target? Number two, how do we talk about college? You all have more expertise to talk about college than anybody else on the planet, but we'll get back to that in a minute. How do we talk about college? This movement is driven and with the belief that all kids deserve the opportunity to go to a four-year college. That's why I opened my schools, is because I believe, regardless of background, regardless of race, economics, all students have the right to go to a four-year college. And it matters that we not take the choice out of that equation. It is my school's responsibility to prepare every student to get into a four-year college and go if that is their choice, and to give them access to the resources and the opportunities to make that a reality. It is not my school's business to tell them what to do with their life beyond that point. And I think that's an incredibly important distinction. We have an enormous legacy of students in historically underserved communities not having real choice because their schools didn't give them the opportunities and the tools to be successful. We have to undo that legacy by preparing them for the future. That's very different than dictating a specific path. And so be rigorous with those in your community about what that means and how you message that to students and to parents about what that looks like and how they imagine that future. So make college a choice everyone deserves, but still a choice. Number three, this gets a little more into the policy weeds, so I won't get too far down this path, but risk number three is that in this effort to organize, the teacher voice isn't featured in the strategies of reform. And so the flip of that is, what are we going to do to make sure educators are at the table at every turn in how we talk about this? We can talk more about union and labor dynamics if that's of interest as we go on. As a charter operator, we're in a non-union environment, and change so much of the policy work around education reform is around fighting about teacher evaluation, how teachers are hired, how teachers are evaluated, and how the profession looks. the teaching job is the most important job in all of this work. And the best thing we can do to help our kids is have a great teacher in every classroom. And the routes to that are challenging and they're complicated. And so in your efforts, make sure that teacher voice, that teacher perspective is at the table at every turn. That's different than necessarily an organizing perspective. It's a teacher perspective. All right, 4 and 5 tackle equity in 2 different ways. So the first risk is that in all of our reform efforts, we lose sight of what equity means for students in our schools and in our school systems. And what I mean by that is, how do you know the reforms that you're fighting for are going to reach all kids? And how do you know that the systems that you are helping to build will serve all kids in an equitable way and allow for that to happen at a much bigger scale, longer in the future, in a much different way? This is particularly meaningful in the charter world. It matters in other worlds also. But in every community you're in, what do your school leaders say about enrollment? How do kids get into their schools? How do kids leave their schools? Is that their choice? Is that someone else's choice? What is the commitment to serving students with special needs in the schools you work with? How do you know? What does it look like? What is the commitment to serving students who are English language learners in the schools you work with? How do you know? And what does it look like? We have a risk here, as I'm someone who fights hard for school choice. We have a risk here that by fighting hard for school choice, we miss the effects that that choice has on all students. And something Strive Prep works hard on and we really pride ourselves on. We have a long way to go, but we really pride ourselves on opening programs for students with severe special needs, serving a higher percentage of English language learners than the districts around us. What are the commitments your organizations you work with doing about that? The messaging on that is pretty murky. So you got to ask some pretty tough questions. Make sure you're fighting for solutions that are going to get equity to all kids, not others, and that also helps with the biggest vulnerability we have politically in this conversation. Which gets to number 5, and I'm going to use a line from a friend of mine named Jamina Bernard, who used to run the TFA office out in New York and is now running a CMO in New York City, which is the notion that the rhetoric of social justice issue of our generation is thrown around so much that it's almost cliche. Education reform is the social justice issue of this generation. And I agree with that. I don't disagree with that. The line from her is that I believe is important for all of us to deeply consider is if education is the social justice issue of the generation, it's the only social justice issue in American history where many of the leaders of the movement are not themselves affected by the injustice that we're fighting. ESFR is known for being ahead on that issue and fighting that hard, and I commend you for that in everything that you're doing and in how you are thinking about race and class and equity in your work. And we all have a shared responsibility, whatever role we play and whatever seat we fill, to fight about that on a daily basis and to talk honestly and openly in community about what does it mean that that's true and how do we change it and how do we change it quickly. What does that look like? So, 5 ideas or something, sort of a state of the movement, things to think about in your work out there. What's your role is the question I would pose to each of you as you think about the education change that you're trying to make. We all have a role to play, and the roles are all very different. Strive Prep's role is to build schools in communities of highest need and to come true on that promise that all kids deserve the opportunity to choose a 4-year college if they so desire. That's our focus. We started 7 years ago with a single school in a neighborhood in Denver where I'd worked with Summer Ridge for a long time. We're now 8 schools. We're 2,300 students. We are 95% students of color, about 90% low income. We represent the English language learner and special needs population in the neighborhoods we're in. And of our 7 schools that were evaluated last year, we run 5 of the 14 highest performing secondary schools in Denver. Thank you. It's notable that other charter management organizations run 6 more of them. So of the 14 highest performing secondary schools in Denver, 11 are run by 3 charter organizations, which to me is a powerful statement about what that kind of choice and opportunity means in this community. So that's our role. what is the role? And you're spending the weekend on organizing, and this theme of organizing work and how you build culture around organizing. So I think it matters enormously to define what does great organizing look like in terms of traditional measures of engagement and of turnout and of all the things I heard listed on the list of sessions that people are talking about, and then why. What is the purpose behind that organization? What is the purpose behind that organizing, and what change very specifically do you seek to see, and do you seek to affect, and what change does your community seek to affect? A common relationship between schools and organizing organizations is there'll be lots of dialogue and there'll be lots of meetings and parents will come and there'll be engagement and discussion about change. And then at the end of the day, when there's an event or a crisis or a threat, the relationship that exists is between the principal and the parents, and that's what determines what happens in those moments and who comes to the meeting and who speaks at the public hearing and how it goes. And so the challenge I would issue for you is the depth of community organizing that you're talking about and that I hear written on all of the sessions you have planned requires a depth of communication and depth of engagement that supersedes that. The reason the principal is the person parents follow in that moment is that's who they have the relationship with and that's who they trust. And so the challenge for all of us is how do we build community engagement where there's that depth of relationship and that depth of trust among lots of different people, not just one person in that positional authority. And so that's the challenge I see before any organization seeking to mobilize around this work, and I'm so grateful for you to be doing it. It's enormously challenging, and it's also enormously important, because that's the difference between isolated pockets of change and transformative community work. That's the difference between everybody coming to the table and saying, this is my piece and this is my role, and us all getting on the same page with one role, one vision of a common community transformation. So what's your role? What are you organizing for and why? What's the message behind that? We'll close with a very brief story, and then I want to throw this open for questions and conversation. We all have, any educator has stories about individual kids. One of the ones that will always live with me is a student who started with our very first class at our original campus, whose name was Jasmine. She goes by Jazz now. She and her mom were one of many students who signed up in our door-to-door campaign. We do all of our recruiting door-to-door in all communities, even though we've been around for a while now. Because the reason for that is so every family has access to the same information regardless of access in different circumstances. And Jasmine was always sort of the straight-A student whose personal world was challenging and complicated. She missed a lot of school. Her family traveled frequently. She was here with her mom. They traveled to see family in Mexico on a regular basis. And she worked her butt off to make sure her grades were always good. At the end of 3 years with us, she made a very difficult choice to take a full ride to a private school in a different neighborhood of town, which was culturally incredibly challenging and academically mostly very rewarding. She is now a first-year student at Occidental on a full ride and comes back and visits often. She was recently in our front office doing some work over the summer, helping out a couple of my administrators. And somebody who didn't know her asked her about her experience and what was it like at Strive Prep. And she, of course, said, I don't go to Strive Prep. I went to West Denver Prep. We changed our name a year ago. So people are still getting used to that. And someone said, so what do you want to do? You know, what are you going to study at Occidental and what do you want to do? And she said, I haven't picked a major yet. I'm gonna explore what I want, but I'm going to come back and teach here when I'm done with my 4 years in college. And the person who didn't know her said, you know, that's fabulous. I'm so excited. You want to be a teacher? And she said, yeah, I'm excited about education and I want to be a teacher. But the reason I want to come teach here is I want to get prepared to be the CEO of the network. I want to replace Mr. Gibbons. The kind of community change I am working for, I will know it has happened when a graduate of our network is the CEO of our network. When a graduate of one of our schools is in my seat. And we do an activity, the statistics activity I led off with you is the first thing we do with new teachers. When we bring all of our teachers back, we do a version of that with the whole staff. And then we ask people to stand up or sit down based on identity with different affiliations. And the last one is Breakthrough or Summer Bridge alumni, because we have a number of them who are teaching. And it will only be 3 more years before the next question will be for Strive Prep alumni to stand, who will be back and teaching in our network. So pay attention to the movement as a whole. Think about why you are organizing in the way that you do and what specific change you seek to effect. such that a generation from now or sooner, an activity like the one we did in this room will lead off with everyone standing, representing all of those children who had the opportunity to go to a four-year college if they so choose. And the CEO of all of the charter networks in town will be graduates of that program. That's the vision I'm working for, and certainly hope is one that all of you share. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm in the dangerous position of standing between you and food, but I would, my time is good. I would love to take your questions, comments, conversation, and throw this open. Yes? It's a great question, and it's funny. We care so much about culture. We don't necessarily do a terrific job of naming it and defining it. Thank you. Question was how we define our own school culture at Strive Prep and how that differs from other schools. And I started with, I don't know that we do a particularly good job of naming it. I want our schools to be a place that exude high expectations at all times and do so in a way with a lot of warmth. The cliche line in a lot of schools like ours is warm strict. I tend to look at it as more, I want it to be level and even keel and very businesslike so that it is a warm, engaging place to go to school. And the expectations are really high, and everybody knows that. And there's a depth to understanding of that. The way I articulate it to educators is I want equal balance of achievement and engagement. We want an incredibly high-performing environment that's focused on college, where we're going to talk about college and work really hard. And engagement is equally important, where I want to know how are students engaged in your classroom every day, how are families engaged in the work of your school, equal balance, achievement, and engagement. How it's different than others is hard to say. You got to go visit a bunch of schools and you decide. We try to keep the volume low. We try to keep this as a very safe and level place where, you know, the range between a good day and a bad day isn't that big, and adults never raise their voice, and there's a warmth about the work while still keeping those high expectations. And the folks who were at Westwood today should tell you what they saw, because that's a better judge than what I can articulate. So, thanks. Good question.
Hi, this isn't really a question, it's more of a comment. I appreciate that you have high expectations for all students. I have 3 siblings with severe autism. They're not going to go to college. And, you know, they still do the standardized tests, and they have adaptive tests for them. Yep. You know, they fail those tests too. They're not, I feel like when people say all students are going to college, they forget people like my siblings. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, so my question, it's a little sensitive topic, but I think, you know, you can handle it. I noticed out of the 5 things that you put on the important things, you left out the race conversation. And I feel like I come from a state, North Carolina, where that's a big deal. And, like, you know, everything that's going on, we're 48 in the state for teacher pay, and it's just all in shambles. And I feel like the race conversation and the school-to-prison pipeline is getting so lost and everything else. And, you know, just looking at this, and, I mean, it's a great list. I believe that the race conversation needs to be a bigger topic. And I just want to know what you feel. I know you're shaking your head, but I want to hear from you what you think about it.
Tell me when you say the race conversation, that means a lot of different things to different people. Tell me what it means to you.
Well, when you started off, you said, I know that I come from white privilege and social status. So when I mean the race conversation, I mean people like myself who came from, you know, had to work his way from the top, you know, family, lost their job in a recession, and I came from a school district that could give 2 craps about me. Yep. And so when I talk about the race conversation, you as a white privileged male, how do you handle those conversations with parents or your kids that you have? Because a lot of these kids are minorities. So how do you grasp that, and how do you go about getting that conversation out to your community?
Absolutely. So 2 things. So the first one is, on the list of 5, I did not articulate that well. The 5th piece about this is the only social justice movement where the leaders are not those affected by the injustice. I meant to name that as a race conversation. I was seeking to do it in a little bit different rhetorical way, and thank you, yes. So this, I think, is probably the most important part of the work, and certainly the most meaningful impact for real change. How do I navigate the conversation myself? I do my best to name it up front. I talk to families a lot about that. I talk with families a lot about the notion that there is a dominant culture that exists in this society that is very race-based, and that as educators, I see us as having a joint role, which is really challenging, of both preparing those students with skills to navigate that culture while at the same time breaking down barriers and trying to change it. And I have that conversation directly with families of we're trying to do both of those things, and I want you to push us both ways. If you don't think we're doing enough of one, tell me. If I don't think we're doing enough of the other one, tell me. We have a variety of different things we do at the staff level, but we do a cultural competence training. We call it our Voices program. It's run centrally. A couple of us work on it all the time on working on building that curriculum, and every staff member participates in that in different ways. And the curriculum there is largely about what you just said, identifying race, class, talking about privilege, getting language and comfort, speaking about it. And we work hard on that. We have a long way to go on this. My organization is not an exemplar on this, and there are certainly moments of breakthrough that I'm proud of, and there are many that I'm not. And it's a constant work in progress. So, yeah, thank you. Go right here.
Like a real short piggyback.
Sweet, go.
I just was wondering how well your teachers throughout all the different schools represent or reflect the population of your students.
Not nearly as well as we'd like. Comparable to other schools and networks in Denver and comparable to DPS, and nowhere near where I'd like it to be. Yeah. Let's go back there. And if you've got the mic, if you want to pass to people, that's fine too. No attachment, however you want to do it.
Hi, I hope you don't feel like I'm putting you on the spot because I respect tremendously what you do. You're serving a substantially larger number of disadvantaged students than DC public or Denver public schools or private schools, yet you're outperforming them on every aspect of standardized state testing except for reading. I was curious what your kind of plan of attack is to get reading above the private school levels.
Good. And so the private schools don't take the same test, but above the district averages and the other sort of high-performing district schools. So, and I love that you've done your homework. Thank you. And no, not putting me on the spot. We talk about this all the time. So I think a couple things about this. I'll answer the question about plan in a minute. I think that you see this with a lot of charter organizations and networks. I think there are, for whatever reason, a lot of us are doing a much better job at math programs and teaching than we are at reading programs and teaching. I don't have a great answer for why that's true, but it's consistently true in a lot of different places. We are blowing up our reading curriculum and changing the model. And I think the biggest root cause, as I see it, of why we've struggled in reading compared to math is that our curriculum model is based on breaking work down into discrete skills and then building a unit plan for the entire year that plans backwards on when those discrete skills need to be taught in order to achieve success at the end of the year on a variety of different outcomes, not just our state test. And math lends itself really well to that approach, and reading not so much. And so we're looking at how do we build a much more holistic plan to teach reading and simply to spend a lot more time reading. So we went to a double block workshop model for reading this past year. I think we've seen modest progress with that and are going to see a lot more. We're also integrating our previously separated reading and writing programs into one program so that kids are practicing reading and practicing writing every day, and then doing everything we can to boost professional development for our reading teachers in all sorts of different ways. So gets in the weeds a little bit, but thank you. It's a great question.
Here you go. So from my perspective, it seems like charter schools are something that are very successful in spots, and it's a central piece of the puzzle. So this is a question for you, but then also a question for you directed at us.
Yep.
How do you envision charter schools, moving forward and growing, but also addressing public schools and all that dynamic there of the two needing to both improve?
Great question, and I have a lot to say about this, so I'll give you a few things and we can see where we go. So the first thing is, I would encourage you all to think about the charter school, traditional school world. Charters are public, so I never say public and charter. Charter schools and traditional schools, or charter schools and district-run schools. Think of them in terms of two lenses. First of all, think about high-quality schools and schools that are not high quality, A, and B, think about it in terms of how much autonomy or how much freedom you believe school leaders should have over what happens in their building. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's really about. And I think that can happen through charters as a vehicle, and in some political landscapes, it's the only vehicle. And it can also happen through a bunch of other ways of adding that level of autonomy in district schools also. So we work really hard on collaboration with the district. I should have, if we'd gotten a little further in the weeds, I would have included this in my points. But that's a huge mission focus for us. The folks at our organization are not there to sort of open isolated islands that are successful. They're there to see systems change in the traditional school system. And so what that looks like is we have a collaborative board of elected charter leaders and district leaders that administer grant funds and recommend policy. I co-chair that. There are 9 of us. We get together every month and talk about how is the district and the charter world working together, what can be better. We train principal residents in our principal training program to go run schools in traditional district environments. We have a sort of peer-to-peer learning sharing thing where we have teachers who come do our data systems with our teachers and work on that. And we're trying to build as many bridges and collaboration opportunities there as possible. I also think, one more point on this, then we'll move on, to my point about student equity and what are we doing around how the impact choice has on equity for kids and enrollment policies, that has everything to do with your question. Because if that's not done well, you get isolated pockets of charters that have a selective impact over time, whereas if it is done well, you get things like we've had in Denver, which is the entire school system going on a single application. So there's no lotteries, there's no applications at different schools. Everyone fills out the same application, and everyone is operating under exactly the same enrollment rules and conditions, which helps level the playing field dramatically to address some of the symptoms of what you're talking about. We could go on that forever, but we'll let a few other people talk.
My question is more so based on something like, I guess you can tell me how you do it and then we can apply it to ourselves. I have an issue with, like you said, the fact that education reform is led by the people who are least directly affected by it. I think that if we really want to improve the education for the children, we have to improve the entire community. And I want to know, what is your, I guess, philosophy on engaging the entire community in the school system and, you know, making sure that students aren't just getting dropped off at school, living one life and then going home and living a completely separate life.
Totally agree with your vision of that, and I think it's a bunch of things. So what we actually do, like what it actually looks like for us, is just trying to build the deepest relationships we possibly can with families and community. And so, like I said before, we do all our recruiting door to door. Every family gets a home visit from us when they enroll. Someone goes to their home, gets to know them, talks about the school. What do you want from us? What do we do together? How do we build this relationship? Tight advisory relationships, and then lots and lots of events of different kinds and in different ways of trying to engage. What you're after, though, is a more global question, right, of how community changes. And I would say, what I'd say philosophically about this is a little bit like my answer to you of sort of there are 2 things that we're doing simultaneously. We have to look at this from a both and framework. We talk a lot at Strive Prep about dropping the either or framework and replacing it with a both and framework in terms of how we think about things. That we both need to collaborate deeply in every aspect of the community work so that our schools are community grown and tightly knit with the community. And at the same time, we have to hold ourselves to a really high standard that we're providing a terrific education in this school, regardless of whatever impact is happening around. And sometimes those are totally congruent in lockstep, and sometimes they struggle. And so I think we have to keep an eye on both parts of that at all times. I think that schools that are integrated and tightly knit with their community are incredibly effective. I think that schools that seek to become a wide variety of things, provide all sorts of services, struggle with maintaining their academic program. And so I think the route here is through partnership, not through offering or providing everything in one house necessarily. So that's largely our approach. Okay.
I have a question on regarding the type of system you guys run overall nationwide. Let's just say students who don't perform well, they're asked by teachers or by counselors or anyone who has authority in school to assist these some form of after school program where they're gonna get help from their homework or any other type of help, but a lot of these students don't attend, and I've seen this throughout pretty much everywhere I've been through. As a student from the LUSD system, the LUSD school, sorry, when I was growing up, I saw the same issues happening, and I recently went to do some service over at my middle school as a teacher assistant, and I still saw the same issues as when I was currently attending. So my question to you is, what do you think the community, whether it's school or the house or even the city, how can we take a different approach in getting these students to go to these programs and for them to not feel like it's mandatory, that it's something negative, that they did something wrong, so they don't take it the wrong way?
It's a great question, and I think there's a lot of pieces in there, right? There's a lot of pieces to that, to doing that well. I would come back to where we started. I think it's all about culture. I think if your school has the culture, and that whatever program you're describing is a part of that culture, and a seamless part of that culture, and those relationships are tight, then you have the opportunity to communicate that and message that effectively to students, and there's a desire to stay, right? This is a part of my community. This is a part of my family. This is a part of the culture of what's expected here. I think doing that well is challenging, but I don't think it's that hard by comparison to a lot of the other things that we're tackling. I mean, the way we approach it, we do lots of after-school activities and support in all kinds of different ways. And the way we approach it with students and families is just very upfront of like, this is our entire program in its entirety. This is why you're choosing this school. This is why we're working with you on this. You know, you help us understand how that works for you, and we communicate to you why we believe it's important. And we find kids are for the most part, are very invested in that. And you're on to something much bigger than why students go to their after-school activity or not. What you're after, I think, is what is the intrinsic motivation, what is the personal motivation students have to succeed, and how do we create school cultures that support that and reinforce that and build that? And that, I think, is a huge part of this. And another thing on the list of questions to ask the schools you're working with, right? Like, what is your culture around that? How do you set it up? How do you think about it? So, it's a great question. Last one.
Oh,
Who's got the mic?
I feel bad asking the last question. Can we do one more? Two more. Okay.
Two more.
Hey guys, I'm Catherine. Chris, I have a question for you that's also about race and class, which I love that most of our questions have touched on those issues, mainly because one thing that really excites me about ESFR is how our leaders of color and our white leaders are walking hand in hand to combat this incredible social justice issue. So my question for you sort of is almost like a flip of JJ's. So JJ was asking, how can we have more leaders of color in this movement? And my question is about sort of what role white leaders or young white leaders can play to help without perpetuating systems of inequity that gave them the privilege that they have today.
It's a great question, and I don't know that I don't know I have a great answer, but I'll do my best. I think that there's a few things. I think the concept of allies here is incredibly important, and naming that and understanding what that means. I think that finding the right kinds of alliances and coalitions, and very much what you just said, building the vision of walking hand in hand to do this together, I think is incredibly important. Naming privilege, talking about privilege, and not being afraid of going right at that conversation is incredibly important. And then the next step, which in the Denver community we are not doing well, is what is our explicit commitment to develop and create opportunities for leadership work in all areas for a very diverse cohort of leaders, and how do we do that? And sort of my commitment to mentor individual people, my commitment to use privilege when I have it to create pathways for others to lead rather than to leading myself, and keeping that in concept at all times, and then looking for every possible opportunity to do it. And then there's the role of young white leaders in general, holding other white leaders accountable to their actions and attitudes about race.
Okay, you get to pick this last one.
I get to pick the last one. Oh boy, we'll go right here. Yep. Sorry to those who didn't get to. I'll be around for afterwards. Yeah.
I know you talked about how a lot of your students are from like the English learning
community. I just wanted to know, how do you guys emphasize or work on building the bridge between their home life and parents who may not speak English, and then building that like community of like school and like making sure they still can identify with their culture but also be in this different environment where it's different. I don't know.
Great question. So we distinguish a bit. It's a little bit of splitting hairs, but we distinguish a bit between the language of instruction and the culture and the culturally competent support in the school. Denver, this is context specific. Denver has a long legacy of court-mandated bilingual education that has created very difficult conditions in the learning environment for a lot of students, and there are a large number of parents who have very serious concerns about that. And so we want to communicate to our families that your culture will be celebrated. We will speak your language to you as a family. We will celebrate your culture and your language in our building and in our community, and we will teach your kids English in the school so that they are successful in what you're trying to achieve as a family. And so that's a nuanced answer, and it's a little bit difficult to do well, and I feel like it's incredibly important. What that looks like, supporting bilingualism in staff at every level possible, including professional development funds for people to go do programs and be prepared there, and then just lots of work in the same vein that a lot of the other questions have had around shared community, partnership, and work together. In the communities we're working in right now, it is predominantly, but not exclusively Spanish, but it is vast majority Spanish. As we move into other neighborhoods, that's certainly going to change. So, yeah. All right, I've been given the hook here. Thank you for such an engaging group. I appreciate it.
I've been called worse and tried to live up. Hope you don't mind a few more stories. I swear to God, y'all, I tell them with love.